The Subnautica 2 drama has sort of erupted onto the scene and it's caught my attention, but I feel I have a slightly different perspective to all the videos I've watched, at least somewhat in certain regards. So to explain that, let's start at the beginning for those who are perhaps not so familiar with the current debacle around the new Subnautica entry. On July 2nd, 2025, the CEO of Unknown Worlds, Ted Gill, alongside the game director, Charlie Cleveland, and technical director, Max Maguire, were fired abruptly with the announcement that industry veteran Steve Papoutis would be taking their place. Krafton, the South Korean-based parent company of Unknown Worlds, most known for publishing and developing the game PUBG, are the ones behind this change, claiming these co-founders are failing their duties and causing Subnautica 2 to fall behind on crucial milestones. Hence their firing and subsequent replacement. Their replacement, Steve Papoutis, is most recently known for being the lead behind the very average Callisto Protocol, but he is certainly a veteran with a record like this, most notably his work on the Dead Space trilogy. So at a glance, if one was excluding their feelings about the original co-founders, this replacement does at worst seem okay. At least that's kind of the general consensus I'm getting from the videos I've watched. But I think part of the picture is being left out. It's surface level to a degree. So let's dig some deeper. When referring to his previous roles, and especially when mentioning Dead Space 1, unlike later entries, he was not the executive producer, but instead only a senior producer. Now you might ask, why does that matter? It's hardly like senior producer is by any means a small role, and you're 100% correct. But it needs to be said that the most important, well-received game under his belt is one where he did not have full control, and that after he did become the executive producer, leading the Dead Space games is when the meddling of EA became present. Whether as a consequence or by coincidence is hard to speculate, of course. But as a synopsis for those less familiar with the trilogy, very quickly things like microtransactions and other very questionable features were implemented until the pot sort of boiled over and the fans gave up on Dead Space. In this, I'm mostly referring to Dead Space 3, which if you're interested in finding more about, there is no end to great videos that discuss every single facet and thing that these games do to insult the fans. So the question remains, why was Steve Papoutis chosen? Why was he specifically selected? Now, before any of that, I want to add that I by no means have any proof that he is not good at his job, and that is not what I'm trying to say. The point I'm trying to illustrate and speculate upon is that he does have a track record of being seemingly malleable and accepting of the terrible and greedy ideas of upper management. And I fear that could be part of the reason why Krafton specifically chose him to replace the Unknown World co-founders, who were known to be more creatively independent and possibly more resistant to corporate overreach. And here's where things start to get a bit murkier, because the main theory circulating right now, one that frankly makes a lot of sense if you follow the paper trail, is that back in 2021, when Krafton acquired Unknown Worlds, part of the deal reportedly included a massive payout clause, a financial incentive that would reward the original co-founders up to $250 million if Subnautica 2 hit specific commercial milestones before the end of 2025. But here's the thing, to hit those milestones, the game would need to launch this year, or at least have strong pre-release traction by about Q4. So ask yourself, what happens if Krafton fires those same co-founders halfway through the year and delays the game? That payout, that clause, it likely gets voided. Suddenly Krafton saves themselves $250 million while shifting the blame to the developers and co-founders for missing milestones. Most recently, a series of internal leaks, since confirmed as authentic by Krafton themselves, have surfaced, offering a narrative that sharply contrasts with the company's public messaging. Instead of a game that's not ready, the documents suggest that Subnautica 2 may not be nearly as undercooked as Krafton has led the public to believe. A leaked internal milestone review from May 2025, verified by both PC Gamer and Video Games Chronicle, shows the game lacked content like 2 missing biomes, a leviathan, a vehicle, a game mode, and about 6 hours of narrative. Now I remind you that the beloved first game when it was first released looked like this. And this allowed the community to become part of the development process, in a way that really benefited the game's growth. Now I will say they are no longer quite the indie studio they once were. They have financial backing, and so they shouldn't release a product quite as unfinished as the original was during its early access. With more money comes higher expectations, rightfully so I'd say. However, there is a clear acceptance and even expectation of these games first releasing into early access before going into full release. And so with that context in mind, it would seem that the current state of the game is seeming ever more acceptable. These slides point to a roughly 70% completion, not that the game was in shambles, though I will say it comes down to personal opinion of what percentage is acceptable for a game to be released into early access. But it would seem that the reaction from devs and fans, the community outrage, even boycott calls, reflects a counter-narrative to that of Krafton. It would seem that the majority agrees that the game under their original co-founders likely could have been released into early access in what they considered an acceptable state. But it is a hard question, because let's be honest, whilst us gamers can be impatient, many games would have benefited from the extra time in the oven, so a developer consciously making the decision under the right circumstances could be applauded. The difficulty is, was it truly the right circumstances, or was it just about the money? I won't lie, it does currently seem to be more about the money from everything we've seen. But I'm sure as the lawsuit between the co-founders and Krafton progresses, we will learn more about the actual truth. Honestly, I'd advise against picking a definitive side until more things become clear, because I can honestly see both sides having some wrongdoing here, as Krafton claims that they abandoned the responsibilities entrusted to them, going as far as to say they ignored repeated requests to assume roles as game director and technical director. They even pointed at the fact that Charlie is focused on personal film projects rather than Subnautica 2. And here's where my opinion seems to particularly diverge from that of most videos I've seen on YouTube. Whilst I love Subnautica and bought it all the way back in early development, it is hard to claim that since the conclusion of that game, the Unknown Worlds has lived up to their reputation. When the Subnautica 2 trailer released, my co-goblin, Gold, had brought it up, and I remember talking to him in both excitement and equally in unease, that it just wouldn't meet our expectations. It's hard to pinpoint every reason why I don't trust that I'll be satisfied with Subnautica 2, but I do hope to be proven wrong. At the same time, I suppose these are considerations. I felt Subnautica Below Zero was a disappointment, that whilst I loved the game's general concept, it greatly misunderstood core concepts that made the original so great. For every one step that game took in the right direction, I felt they took 2 steps back, leaving me with a deep feeling of apathy. The development of that game had also reportedly been a mess. The story had been rewritten numerous times, and what we got was a patchwork narrative, and unfortunately, you can see the seams. I also couldn't help but notice that it felt like Below Zero was missing something. As I explored the unknown depths, one thing became obvious to me. It was not having the same profound effect, that chilling feeling of unease that runs through your brain, that subtle dark fear of the abyss and the unknown. The original did it so well that it induced a fear most people didn't even know they had. My first thought was merely that I had become numb to it over the years. But that can't be true, because playing the original I still get those chills. And I can't say it's a failing of the visuals, because I think many parts of Below Zero are visually potent. And that's when I started to narrow it down. The music and ambience, whilst okay, just didn't feel quite as masterful as it did in the original. From its amazing theme song that lingers with me even now, to its intense and carefully designed ambience. What many people don't know is they fired the guy behind this, Simon Chalinsky. It would seem that he had some vaguely political posts on Twitter, as I understand it, which created some backlash. I also want to make it clear, I don't want to get political here. This isn't the time, nor the place, nor do I have the energy to have that nuanced discussion in connection to Subnautica of all things. But this is a difficult subject to navigate because his firing was inherently linked to pseudo-political reasonings. I will make it clear about one stance. I do believe when you're working for a big company, what you publicly say does matter and can reflect poorly on the studio you're working for. Especially if on that same account where you freely scream into the void that is Twitter, you also talk about that very game and studio you work for. You should be more careful in those situations. By all means have your opinion, but when what you say could negatively drag down what you've helped build up, when it could harm others around you that haven't done or said anything to draw negative attention, I do believe that to be irresponsible, albeit understandable. We can all be emotional and we often misattribute the value or importance that one single post can have, but it still doesn't make it right. Now, I'm not digging through all of Twitter to see everything he said whilst employed at Unknown Worlds, nor since then. This video isn't about him or that drama, but I am making a point about how his contribution will be missed and how their handling of this situation from the outside looking in doesn't fill me with hope. From the links and evidence given in the Reddit post, my opinion is that he shared his view on many sensitive subjects, but the evidence provided doesn't conclusively support the harsher labels the Reddit post have assigned him, such as being hateful or alt-right. To be clear, I'm not saying he's not these things either, but the evidence they've supplied isn't enough to objectively conclude that. But I urge you to make up your own mind on this subject. What I do think is that he easily could have been punished internally. They could have requested him to remove the post, perhaps made a public apology. After all, most of the posts complained about seem to be in fact reposts. And like it or not, we all have opinions and we all don't agree on everything. I think it would have been a far more satisfactory conclusion if instead he was given the opportunity to correct his behaviour. Because I think it's a matter of objectivity that his work directly played into the success of the game, and could have been a positive boon in later titles as well. It is a much more beneficial thing when politics can be buried in sake of creating an incredible experience. But perhaps you don't share my view. In your mind, you believe that he should have been fired as he was, and that's fair. But that isn't the only thing that's tarnished my view of these directors, and really the studio as a whole. Their handling of the game Moonbreaker is a really significant catalyst for my uncertainty. I'm sure many of you have no clue about this game, which speaks volumes to how successful it was. Yet this title was led by Cleveland and made by Unknown Worlds. From the reviews I've seen, the game is regarded as tone deaf. They went from producing potent and creative single-player narrative experiences in the survival game genre to making a PvP turn-based tabletop tactics game. So the whiplash is understandable. Though I understand from the developer's perspective how working on something completely different could be appealing. I also don't think studios should be exclusively locked into the same games on repeat, because that's how we get slop like the modern Call of Duty franchise. Generally, the consensus seems to be that it is mechanically competent but creatively flat as a game, which to me is particularly damning for a studio praised for its creativity and experimentation in its work with Subnautica, though it seems that it definitely satisfied some niche on release, but I'm not confident that this lasted. It's a struggle to research this because now 2 years later, it seems discussion around the game has run dry. Even on YouTube, it seems there are barely any videos made on it, which does lead one to believe the game has failed to cement itself long term. One reason behind why the game may have died is the microtransactions. Now, immediately, opinions are going to vary a great deal depending on the genre of games you are most loyal to, and I'm not here to condemn all microtransactions. However, it does seem that microtransactions within Moonbreaker on launch were seen as tasteless, from the likes of boosters to multiple currencies that obscure the real life value of what you're buying, though many seem to defend the game because they've offered ways of buying some stuff with earnable in-game currency. But the reason I think this was an issue is that it's a PvP game, so if you're willing to spend the money, you would have an advantage over the average user, and from what I can tell, this likely played a role in the game's failure. And so here we are. Subnautica 2 stands at the precipice, both promising and precarious. On one hand, the allure is still there, the potential for wonder, for that creeping dread in the deep. And most of all, what truly excites me is the thought of being able to enjoy and experience what Subnautica offers with friends. But on the other hand, there's a growing unease, a pattern of decisions, of compromises, some corporate, some creative, that suggest the soul of Unknown Worlds may be shifting, or even slipping away entirely. And that's what makes this moment so difficult, because really, this is partially my fault. I'm the one who's built up what I imagine Subnautica 2 to be, but I cannot ignore everything surrounding it either, because my fear is that we'll get a technically competent game dressed in Subnautica's skin, but missing its heart. And maybe I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. Hopefully this is just a painful growth spurt on the way to something brilliant. Maybe Krafton really will give the team the time, freedom and support they need. With any luck, this backlash might even inspire them to upkeep their promise regarding the $250 million bonus. But until we know more, all we can do is